to us who have been following this process of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. He's currently African Union Commissioner for Trade and Industry. He previously worked in the Zambian Civil Service at home and abroad, and as Deputy Executive Secretary of SADC. In his current position, he has provided strategic leadership in facilitating negotiations, conclusions, and the ratification of the agreement establishing the African Continental Free Trade Area. In addition, Ambassador Muchanga has provided similar leadership on matters of trade, industrialization, mining, and customs cooperation. For us who have known him, we can attest to that he works with ease at technical, professional, management, leadership, and political levels. As I earlier mentioned, Ambassador Muchanga will remain a very important person for the Continental Free Trade Area for Africa. He's the architect of the whole process, and that's why we are happy that, as the saying goes, we are going to hear it from the horse's mouth. And we are privileged and happy to have you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and thank you very much for your very gracious introduction. I salute you and also the Executive Director of TRALAC, as well as all the participants who are in this two-day annual meeting. And I would like to begin by thanking TRALAC for the opportunity that you have accorded me to deliver a keynote address at your 2020 annual conference, which you are holding under the theme, Trade Governance in Africa amidst the COVID-19 pandemic and other global challenges. Your gracious gesture to invite me to this event this afternoon consolidates the evolving strategic partnerships between our two institutions. The space that you have given me this afternoon also gives me the opportunity to speak about the collective vision on the way forward for African integration as we confront the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm sure other views will be expressed on this critical issue over the next 2 days. Like you indicated, I should have been here in the morning, but I was required to represent my colleague, the Commissioner for Economic Affairs, in a discussion with the Permanent Representative Committee as we prepare for the mid-year summit on coordination. His boss is on leave, so I had to present his report on the status of regional integration in Africa. But the executive director is always very, very accommodating. So she gave me space this afternoon. And once again, I'm most grateful. This TRALAC annual conference is the first of its kind. And this is because it's a virtual event. And this serves as a reminder of the difficult times we are living in. The COVID-19 pandemic has adversely affected the whole world and has consequently not spared Africa. The bad news is that the COVID-19 pandemic is not yet over. For as long as there is no vaccine, it will remain a daily existential threat to each and every human being on this planet. And for policymakers, it will take time to analyze all its implications for individual governments, as well as for the whole of Africa. However, certain lessons can be learned. We can also try to identify new challenges when it comes to the question of how Africa will respond to future pandemics and disasters, including those that will be brought about by climate change and the displacement of people. The first fact to be recognized is that we are all in the same boat. The size of the engine of the boat might differ, but we cannot finally conquer this enemy through our own devices and via national responses only. Not even the biggest and the strongest economies are immune against the vulnerabilities brought about by the realities of an interdependent global economy. This virus does not recognize national jurisdictions, nor border controls. In this state of affairs, we either swim together or sink together if the global boat capsizes. A second lesson can be learned from how governments all over the world initially responded and how new policies have been designed to ensure more effective and joint answers. In the beginning, practically all governments invoked national emergency powers. They closed borders, they announced lockdown measures, and they restricted trade in essential equipment and medicines. A recent report by the World Trade Organization shows how members of this global trade organization have used trade measures to expedite access to critical medical goods and services as part of their responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. Trade has, in this respect, played a noticeable role in improving access to essential medical goods and services since the start of this pandemic. The shortages of medical personnel, personal protective equipment encountered around the world in the early phase of the pandemic have eased somewhat as production and trade have expanded to meet the unparalleled spike in demand. Initial data from the WTO's Secretariat for 41 countries indicates that trade in medical goods grew by 38.7% in the first half of this year, although sourcing of certain products remains a challenge for most developing countries. In addition, the report describes a wide range of trade-related measures that members have employed, and these range from temporary reductions or deferral of duties to taxes and other charges on COVID-19 critical medicines, as well as supplies to, as well as simplification of customs procedures and border clearance. The WTO report further looks at intellectual property related measures that members have used to facilitate innovation in and access to COVID-19 related technologies, such as the use of compulsory or government use licenses, efforts to foster access to relevant patent databases, and steps to make it easier to exchange clinical trial data. In addition to the foregoing, the report examines how the WTO member states have acted to facilitate telemedicine and the international movement of health workers. There are lessons for ourselves as well. One of them is about national public health care. Another is that regional structures, such as the secretariats of the regional economic communities, can play vital roles in designing guidelines and procedures for joint responses and harmonized border control measures. In terms of continental disasters, we need not only the spirit of solidarity, but also the practical demonstration of how regional integration arrangements must be used to facilitate joint responses. Let me now turn to the African Continental Integration Program. As the first phase negotiations to conclude the African Continental Free Trade Area protocols come towards conclusion, towards an end, we have to take note of the fact that the world and the African continent are increasingly interdependent. In addition, faster recovery of African economies will be facilitated by start of trading under the African Continental Free Trade Area. The main aim behind the African Continental Free Trade Area is to boost intra-African trade. This is an ambitious and necessary undertaking. Therefore, our focus is on ensuring that this trade arrangement, which goes beyond the traditional emphasis on trade in goods, is fit for the purpose for which it was designed for. In this respect, we've designed it in such a manner that it provides an adequate framework for meeting all the major trade and development challenges that we still face as a continent, including those that will require joint responses. Climate change, environmental disasters, and refugees fall in this category in addition to economic integration. We are in the final stages of concluding the outstanding negotiations in order to commence trade in goods and services under the preferential trading rules of the African Continental Free Trade Area legal instruments. The COVID-19 pandemic disrupted earlier plans and schedules for meetings of trade officials and ministers. But we've nevertheless made considerable progress using the virtual platform. Our target is that trade in goods and services under the African Continental Free Trade Area starts on 1st of January 2021, preceded by an extraordinary summit on 5th December this year. The success of the African Continental Free Trade Area depends on the proper implementation of the commitments undertaken by the state parties. Domestic follow-up action will be critical in this regard. And some of our state parties will need technical assistance to ensure that the intended benefits materialize and that trade will be regulated in a rules-based and transparent manner. The achievement of the African Continental Free Trade Area goals involves the utilization of the regional economic communities to serve as its building blocks, as provided for in Article 5 of the agreement establishing the African Continental Free Trade Area. The regional economic communities are also building blocks of the African economic community. To this end, we've constructed new arrangements and mechanisms on how the regional economic communities will contribute to the effectiveness of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Under the African Union institutional reform process, we have proposed a draft framework of collaboration among the African Union Commission, the Secretariat of the African Continental Free Trade Area, as well as the secretariats of the 8 regional economic communities. And that draft has been shared with all these strategic partners. The draft framework of collaboration, when adopted, will facilitate synergy by overcoming overlaps and duplication, and in the process, promote efficiency in advancing the agenda of African integration. It will also promote transparency, which is critical to building trust among the collaborating partners. The negotiation phases of the African Continental Free Trade Area will progressively expand as we deepen our continental economic integration process. During 2020, the negotiations of the first two protocols of the African Continental Free Trade Area will be undertaken. And these relate to investment, competition policy, and intellectual property rights. As part of progressive deepening of our integration, the 2020 Assembly session gave us a mandate to begin phase 3 negotiations on a protocol on the digital trade and e-commerce as soon as we finish the second phase negotiations. We'll be recommending to the ministers when they meet on the 30th that we bring forward these negotiations so that they're held together with the phase 2 negotiations, given the importance of, or the growing importance, let me emphasize, of e-commerce in this era of the COVID-19 pandemic. Data imaging shows that e-commerce has grown very, very rapidly during the COVID-19 process. As we move forward, we are aware of several challenges. And we're also aware that trade can be a driver of growth, sustainable development, and poverty reduction. But it's not an automatic process. The process requires trade policies that are dynamic, that are inclusive, and are responsive to constantly changing national, regional, and global contexts. And above all, these must be effectively implemented at all levels with win-win outcomes. At this point, I would like also to state that trade facilitation remains one of our biggest challenges on the African continent. One of the legal instruments of the African Continental Free Trade Area deals with trade facilitation, and another one on non-tariff barriers. During your meeting, I noticed that you have a panel discussion on the difficulties being experienced by freight forwarders and firms doing business across Africa. This is clearly a matter to be prioritized. When doing so, we have to recognize essential features of border administration, such as the fact that they fall squarely under national jurisdictions. The sovereignty of states therefore come into play. But this notwithstanding, the effective implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area legal instruments is a matter of top priority. Trans-trade is one of the areas of collaboration in the draft framework of collaboration, which I talked about earlier. I had a very fruitful meeting with the members of the Permanent Representative Committee this morning on the status of regional economic integration. Among my key messages were that Africa's development trajectory lies in leveraging regional and continental economic integration because it expands our development policy space. My other message was that if we effectively implement legal instruments, policies, strategies, and programs of regional and continental economic integration, we shall be better placed to overcome our underdevelopment trap, which makes us lag behind in the development process. And if we overcome it, we shall then create conditions for catching up in the global development process. And these two messages are the same that I want to leave with you as you go through your annual conference. I'll end here and wish you success in your deliberations and look forward to reading your outcome report. And I thank each and every one of you for your kind attention. Thank you very much, Chairman and the Executive Director.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Muchanga, for those words that have taken us on a broad journey across the global landscape of trade governance and brought us very squarely to our own trade and integration agenda with a focal point on the African Continental Free Trade Area. You've emphasized a number of very important issues which we will pick up in our conversations in sessions a little bit later on trade facilitation, the digital economy, and so on. Commissioner Muchanga, we're extremely pleased that you will be able to take a few questions, and I'm just looking at the Q&A box, and we have a question to start off the round, and I will invite panelists and participants to post some more questions for us to put to the Commissioner. And Commissioner, I see them coming through now very fast. The first question comes from Andrew Ortenio. He says, it's totally understandable that the coronavirus is a new and very unexpected phenomenon. However, one would have expected to see a more regionally coordinated response to the pandemic. But unfortunately, this has not happened. Why is this so? If we could have your response to that, and then we'll move to a second question. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. It's a very pertinent question, and it's good that it has come up. I'd like to indicate that when the COVID-19 pandemic hit us, everybody did not expect it. Everybody was taken unawares. That's the reality on the ground. But what we did at the level of the African Union was to immediately call for a conference of ministers of health through my colleague, the Commissioner for Health and Social Affairs. And we started a process of exchanging information and also coordinating a number of measures. And under the African Union Commission, we have what we call the Africa Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And it has sub-regional offices in all the 5 regions of Africa: the southern part, the western part, the central part, the eastern part, the northern part. We have these sub-regional centers. And we started now engaging with even the private sector to see if we can establish a continental platform for the supply of all medicines and other supplies required to fight the COVID-19 pandemic. And this was established in June this year. And because of that, I think it has helped quite a lot of African countries. Even some of the countries in the Caribbean have joined that platform, and Africa has said they are welcome to join. Through that platform, each country is able to indicate the requirement of PPEs that it needs in a given period, and they'll be supplied through the platform. That was the first response. Then we also worked with the agencies like the African Export-Import Bank and the Afro Champions to mobilize producers of pharmaceutical products in Africa. And through their federation, were able to do so, and they were able to indicate what they needed to start producing to meet the demand. And the line of credit of $300 million was provided by the African Export-Import Bank. And to ensure that we have a long-term arrangement, we also started developing a document on the African Union Trade Corridor. That document is being considered by trade ministers, being considered by directors of customs, and we hope that during the course of the year, it is going to be adopted. And we want to make it as a permanent trade corridor and will be part of the structures of the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat, so that in the future, when we have a similar pandemic, we'll respond more quickly. Yes, we did not respond immediately, but we eventually managed to respond. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. We have another one, and I think this is an extremely interesting one. What is the African Union Commission doing to ensure information sharing amongst member states regarding the introduction of COVID-19 trade facilitation measures? I think this may refer to the African Trade Observatory.
Yes.
Your thoughts on that? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's true. Like indicated, key players in trade facilitation are directors generals of customs. So we have shared that document, and we have also shared with all the directors general of customs the documents which have come from ASCUDA on how to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. So there's that process of information sharing, which is ongoing. And at the level of the African Union, all the departments, we have a working group involving all the departments, so that we share information not just related to trade facilitation, but also other pertinent issues that we can deal with it to fight the pandemic. But overall, the Trade Corridor Project is going to answer all those. Thank you.
Commissioner, this takes us a little bit further forward into the implementation stage of the AFCFTA. And Adnam says, what do you think is the biggest challenge in implementing the AFCFTA? There are further questions, and I'll read those as well. Is it where to draw the line on infant industry argument? Is it the continuation of political will or weak institutional capacity of African government, or is it something else completely? Commissioner, over to you.
Yes, it's very, very loaded. The biggest challenge in implementing the agreement establishing the African Continental Free Trade Area is a mindset issue. The process is a process of change management. So we needed to change at all levels. The business community must see the African Continental Free Trade Area as their new domestic market. And once they see that, they should start mobilizing investments to supply that market. Either they do it on their own, or they go into joint ventures. And part of that response is to come up with the distribution centers across Africa, so that the goods must move speedily across the entire continent. So that is required as a process of change. Equally, the policymakers at the national level must also see that we have a new domestic market. And therefore, when we are making policy pronouncements, we are no longer going to talk about the national market. We should talk about the continental market. And to assist in the process, we are developing what we are going to call the Made in Africa standard, so that when the goods are produced, instead of being labeled made in country X, they will be labeled made in Africa, so that we move in that direction. And of course, at the national level, there's always a tendency to see this process as an add-on to responsibilities. I've got a different view, but the member states is saying, let's continue with what we have. When we are preparing for implementation, one of the recommendations I made to the ministers is that in each and every country, we should have a chief implementation officer in member states, so that the daily responsibility will be on how they are implementing the agreement at the national level. That is very, very, very important. The regional level also matters. The regional economic communities are both building blocks of the African Continental Free Trade Area and the African Economic Community, and I indicated that in my statement. And to assist in this process, we needed to build trust, we needed to build transparency, and we need to start collaboration. And that's why we proposed to have a document called the Draft Framework of Collaboration among the African Union Commission, the Secretariat of the African Continental Free Trade Area, and the regional economic communities, so that we have synergies and we remove overlap and duplication, and we stop wastage of resources. Then, of course, the Secretariat must hit the ground running. And it must do so in such a situation that the targeted date of start of trading is 1st of January 2021, which means that my brother, the Secretary General of the Secretariat in Accra, Ghana, must have the full support of the member states to ensure that all the staff are in their positions so that they can promote implementation as soon as possible. There are other issues related to finance, there are other issues related to technology, but the biggest challenge is mindset. We are in a reform process, we are in transforming, we are putting behind us the status quo. We are beginning a new era, and everybody should be ready to let go of the status quo and embrace the new era. That is not easy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for that reminder. Change management is not easy, but it is essential if we are to embrace a new governance regime and to make it work to promote Africa's trade, intra-Africa trade, and trade with the global economy. We have an interesting question, Commissioner, related to the movement of people across borders. It comes from Elizabeth, and she's saying, given that trade in the AFCFTA depends also on the movement of people across borders, what recommendations would you make that would support bringing the AU Free Movement Protocol into force?
This is one of the legal instruments that have not progressed very fast in terms of signature and ratification. We discussed it this morning when I was briefing the Permanent Representative Committee. And the Commissioner for Political Affairs told us that as of today, we've got 32 countries that have signed the protocol, and only 4 have ratified. For it to come into force, it requires a minimum of 15 ratifications. So we still have 11 more ratifications to go before it comes into force. Now, one of the issues that one must understand is that for some regions, I think here we can give accolades to West Africa and East Africa, where free movement of people is not a major problem. They score very, very, very high on the index that we have developed to measure regional integration. It's 1.0 for East Africa and 0.99 for West Africa. But in some regions, there are a lot of apprehensions about free movement of people, and it's not an easy answer. But it can also be provided by the process of rapid economic development. People move to seek opportunities, and if development across Africa opens up opportunities, then there will be demand for labor. And those countries that are currently not positioned to accept people from other regions, when they see the demand for labor, they'll readily agree that these people must come. So it's not an easy process. It's very critical, it's very, very essential, but it's something which is very difficult to realize as long as Africa is in the underdevelopment trap. So let us first of all overcome the underdevelopment trap, and then we'll see greater demand for labor across Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Our final question, we know that you have a very busy schedule this afternoon as well, relates to the role of the private sector. And of course, underway is a very important initiative to establish the African Business Council. Can you tell us a little bit about the engagement with the private sector to ensure the success of the AFCFTA? Thank you, Commissioner.
We got a very positive and growing engagement with the African private sector. When one of them came to the African Union headquarters for the first time, he told me that he never imagined he would come to the African Union headquarters. And as far as we are concerned, the African Union is always talking about politics, not about business. So he said, it's my greatest pleasure to come to the African Union headquarters. And he said that when I was leaving, and the one who said this is the late Ali from Tanzania. He said, when I was leaving to come to the African Union headquarters, my people were asking me the same question. Why are you wasting your time to go to the African Union headquarters? But since we started negotiations on the African Continental Free Trade Area, we realized very early that the implementers of this agreement are going to be the business sector. So we started engaging with them. And we developed a memorandum of understanding with the Afro Champions Initiative, the Chambers of Mines. They created the Association of African Chambers of Mines, and they are working on a memorandum of understanding with us. The African manufacturers are also working on an agreement to formalize the African Manufacturers Association. They call themselves Pan-African Manufacturers Association. And we are going to have a memorandum of understanding with them. We have a relationship with the Federation of the Associations of Pharmaceutical Industries across Africa. And we have similar arrangements with the private sector in finance and accounting. So there is a growing board of the private sector very much interested in working with us. And to this end, we decided that we must have a continental umbrella board of all the private sector entities, and it's going to be called the African Business Council. And the consultations are underway right now to see if they can come up with the legal instruments to formalize that. And we've deliberately said it must be driven by the private sector so that they own it. And when they've established that the council, and their target is to do it by November this year, then they've elected their executive body. They've decided on the location of the council and also appointed the chief executive officer. Then we'll be in a position to enter into a memorandum of understanding with them. And in order to ensure that that process grows with a dynamism of its own, we've also created the African Continental Free Trade Area Business Council, which meets just before the summit each year. And it's deliberately so that the business sector is given the opportunity to engage with the heads of state and government. So this is where we are on the African Business Council. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner, for that. And may I then propose to thank you on behalf of all our panelists and our participants for taking time and providing such a rich overview of the developments associated with the AFCFTA negotiations, the implementation that lies ahead, and the role of the private sector. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'll take leave now and wish you all the best in your deliberations. I look forward to reading your report.
Thank you so much, Commissioner, and thank you again for joining us. Bye-bye. Thank you.